April marks the 4th anniversary of my being here on this land. And what you see behind me is what this space used to look like. And 4 years ago in April, this is exactly what I came onto. Not knowing much about plantains and how they explode in growth as soon as the rains come. But this is a lessons learned video. So what you see behind me is how most of us in Central America will come upon land. It's either cow pasture, barren after it's been farmed, slash and burn, or it's a cash crop. So plantain is, I'd say, arguably the best option because there is at least ground cover. It's a lot of biomass as these plantains, well, they fall, they have their cycles, and they reproduce prolifically. I think from what I understood, this land is for 30 years has been plantain. And so in this progression of translating this into a food forest, there were a lot of lessons learned. So these examples, these ideas, they might apply to individuals as well who bought in cow pasture or have a barren piece of land. But it's important to plan ahead and to understand what needs to be done and make sure we take the appropriate steps. All right, so one of the most expensive lessons that I learned in my first few years upon doing this, you see, this land is about 5 acres. And when you have a big space, we think, oh, let's put a little bit everywhere. Run around, let's try to decorate it all. And at first it sounds great. Like as you learn about this project and myself, I'll tell you, I never liked the idea of planting in rows. There's nothing natural about that. Nature drops a seed and the tree sprouts where she wants to. And so in that fashion, I planted everywhere. I was sporadic. I've moved things and not moved them, as in, picked random spots picked little clusters, made guilds in places that, well, they weren't my priority, my first bit of attention. Different banana circles intermixed within this mess of plantains and put herbs all about. And look, what ended up happening is that, and it's not clear when you look at this, but as soon as the rains start, I'd say July, you can't walk about this. I mean, every bit of seed that fell from the last year, every, thing coming in the air, these airborne seeds, needless to say, the seeds that are stored in the ground, all of that from nature, they will all sprout and they will consume this field. And what happens when you have a plantain field, the culture here with plantains, as it is a cash crop, people here have a process, something they do with their plantains. So they come and they indiscriminately chop everything. And one of the most valuable lessons I learned that first year is that the jungle will overgrow and it will consume everything you love and think is meant to be here because it has its own plans. And then when you ask your team of workers to come and clean up, as you have to every 3 weeks, they will come and unknowingly, they will chop and destroy all your hard work. So as that saying goes, energy flows where attention goes. And for the most part, I walk the perimeter of this land. I'm not always walking out down the middle. So rightfully so, to plant stuff where you're not going to be attentive, it's just not a good idea. And also, a big part of my step 1 guide in Legacy Food Forest is, for most folks, we are overwhelmed with information online. Some folks struggle to plant that first tree. And a lot of us, for the most part, when you buy land, we never know what we're going to do with the center of it. It's hard to design everything. It's not something that I would wish for anyone to rush. So instead, starting with the edge, starting with the boundary, it's a really great way to direct your energy where it's going to be that first year, right? Because you're understanding how the terrain moves and you're watching it from its edges. All right, so what was the greatest mistake in scattering everything that I was planting? Well, at that time, I wasn't necessarily planting everything by seed. I was buying nursery plants. And when you have lots of nursery plants that you can't give your full attention to, because taking care of the tree in a bag is half the battle, just like a tenth of it. It's everything else that matters. It's getting it in the ground, making sure it survives that first year. And in some ways, quite literally walking past it and pulling the weeds around it, sharing that exchange. And when you have such a big piece of land, you know, it's hard to do that. So there are areas that I would walk around most often. There are trails that I would take more frequently. And the lesson is that those are the spaces where all of my first year trees should have gone. Because, so despite all the failures, there are some amazing lessons to be learned in that. And this, having lost so many trees to indiscriminate chopping and jungle overcoming things, I learned probably my most valuable principle. And it's the thing that I share first on legacyfoodforest.com. It is the use of perimeter planting. Wow, planting the boundary is almost obvious now, because what happens when you get a piece of land? Your priority at first, especially if you have a forest, is to make sure that neighbors, animals, and, well, I guess, you know, that's important if you live in a farming area. So around me there are lots of cows and horses, so these animals will pursue food, and your baby fruit trees and untouched grasses are likely right up there on their desired list. So they'll come in through the boundary, and therefore I'm constantly walking the perimeter, and I'm checking the perimeter. And I'm ensuring that the perimeter is not broken, and that where it is broken, well, especially at that time, I had horses, I couldn't let them escape. So in doing that, where was my attention focused the most? It was around the perimeter. So with that, the trees I planted nearby, they'd all survived. And those that I planted in the midst of the plantain fields, with a rational belief. It was that over time I wanted to convert the plantain field into the food forest. But being that there is just so many of them and that they change so sporadically, as in you walk by one week and you think you've defined a trail, you come back the next and there's just so much new growth and height, and there's new shoots, and we get lost. So let this be maybe a lesson that can save someone else, but start with the boundary. And if you are interested, I have, and will certainly be speaking more on this subject. It's just been a few days since I've posted. Something about the nerves or just finishing a video can be challenging, but more to be spoken about. But for now, just keeping the algorithm fed and continuing to post content.